Hello, I'm May Carey with Devil May Care, and welcome to my new series, Level 1 Sewing. This is for all of those people who, as yet, have not mastered the art of putting two pieces of cloth together with thread, and perhaps even for a few people that could do with a brush up or just looking for a few pointers. It's for everybody, really, let's be honest. Now, the first thing we're going to need for this is not a sewing machine. That's right. The first thing that you start with when sewing, especially when making your own costume from scratch, is not a sewing machine. It's a pattern. That's right. Episode 1 is going to be all about reading patterns because there's not a whole lot you can do with anything from a pattern if you don't know how to read the pattern. I know it seems kind of obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people apparently will go out and buy a pattern and buy fabric and then not know what to do with the two once they get home. So we're going to show you what to do with them. Now, the first thing is, obviously, this is a pattern. This is what they look like. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that in some respect or other. Something you may not realize is that there's a lot of important information on the outside of the envelope. That's what it's called. Pretty obvious, right? Before you even actually get to the pattern itself. Let's have a look. So here we have a pattern, specifically the pattern that I'm going to be using for this tutorial, for this class, if you will. This is Simplicity 4219. Can you see? There are more than just Simplicity patterns out there. There are lots and lots of pattern companies. The ones you're most likely to come across are going to be Simplicity or Butterick or McCall's. Those are the ones carried in places like Walmart and Michael's and that sort of thing. There are many others out there. Simplicity is probably one of the most user-friendly brands. I won't say easy. Easy is a strong word because there are lots of levels even within Simplicity patterns. This one is relatively easy. It's a fairly simple garment, very few pattern pieces, and those pieces are relatively square and simple in size. Simplicity is a good place to start. They have a lot of costume patterns, and they have a lot of really good patterns. I have a lot of Simplicity patterns, and I've had good luck with all of them. So, we have the name, we have the number. That number and company name, while it may not seem all that important, somewhat arbitrary, it is the thing that allows you to go from something kind of like this, a catalog that's full of pictures of what patterns can make, to something like this, which is a drawer full of lots of different patterns, and you can actually find what you're looking for. Because even in the store, the drawers are full of patterns, all organized by pattern number, size, and company. And you're not going to be able to find anything in there without that information. So that's quite important. And yes, those two things I just showed you are my personal collection of patterns and how I keep them organized. The first step to solving a problem is admitting you have a problem. I just don't feel like solving the problem. Now then, the next important piece of information to find on the pattern envelope is the size. Yes, and that is pertinent for reasons that may or may not be obvious. The size determines exactly which pattern you need based on your size. This one right here is very helpful. It has all the sizes. Everything from extra small to extra large are in this envelope. Part of that is because it is such a simple pattern and requires so few pieces, it can have duplicates of those pieces. Lots and lots of duplicates. The more complicated patterns will have a smaller size range available with each envelope that you buy. Now, something to remember about the size, just because you wear, say, a medium size t-shirt or button-up shirt, doesn't necessarily mean you need to get a medium size pattern. That is determined by your measurements. Knowing the size of the pattern and the ultimate garment serves more than one purpose. Of course, it lets you know what pattern you need to buy because they all come in different sizes and you need to have the one that suits you. The other thing it lets you know happens on the back of the pattern, and that is the sizing chart. That tells you just what size you'll need, and it also tells you how much fabric you'll need for that size. Now, the sizing chart on the back, as you see here, is a lot of information. I'm going to try and help narrow that down a little bit if I can. I hope you can see this. First of all, look up here, body measurements. That is how you determine your size. See, we've got your measurements going across here and the sizes going across here. So remember that aforementioned medium t-shirt? In order for you to have a medium-sized pattern, you need between 38 and 40-inch chest, or bust for ladies, and between a 39 and 41-inch hip. If you don't know how to take measurements, don't worry, I will cover that in a later episode. But that is how you determine what size you need. The other bit of information back here that's helpful is further down. This section of the chart tells you how many yards of fabric you're going to need for any given piece. Now, there are 4 different, if you see them over here on the side, there are 4 different views or variations of this particular shirt. I know they all look like the same ye old puffy shirt. There are subtle differences, different cuffs, different collar, those sorts of things. But for this exercise, just understand that there are 4 different views, and each of these views are represented in the chart. This is view A, this is view B, this right here is view A and B, or shirt A and B as it's listed here. And when you move across to your medium, which we'll say that's the size we're going with, you need 3 3/8 yards for shirt A or B. That's how much fabric you need for that size shirt. And you see, it's actually the same amount of fabric for all 4 of these sizes. The extra small has a little bit less. That's not necessarily standard. The amount of fabric can change dramatically from one size to the next, depending on the pattern, depending on the garment. But this is where you find that information. Something you might notice over here is that we've got 2 sets of yard amounts, yardage measurements. That's based on the fact that we've got 45-inch here, 60-inch here. That is referring to the width of fabric on the bolt. I'll get more into that when we talk about fabric. But remember that there is a difference, and that does mean something different in terms of how much fabric you're going to need yardage-wise. Now, when it comes to determining which size you actually need, obviously there's an aspect of personal measurement that does come into that. You need to know how big you are in various areas so that you know which pattern size you need. I will be covering that in another episode. If you need it, don't worry. If you already know how to take your own sizes and measurements, go for it. You don't need it. And now, for the really scary part. Taking the pattern out of the envelope. Yes, I did just drop pieces. This is a pattern I have used before. Quite a bit before, as a matter of fact. This is, if you can tell looking at it, ye old puffy shirt pattern. I have used it a lot. It is incredibly useful. In case you didn't get that number and you need to see it again, it is Simplicity 4219. It is a very, very useful pattern, and interestingly enough, almost a one-size-fits-all. There's no such thing really as a one-size-fits-all, but it gets pretty close. There's minimal sizing to it, and it's nice and big and baggy on just about everybody. It's wonderful. Now then, the first thing that you'll notice coming out of the pattern envelope are these. These are the instructions. Those are quite important, and they can be quite difficult to understand. Let's go over them one frame at a time. All right, and here we have page 1 of 4, first frame of the instructions for this particular pattern, Simplicity 4219. And this first frame right here, as you see, just shows you all the different views of the possible garment you could be making. We've got A, which has all the little fluffy bits. We've got B, which is fairly plain. We've got C that has gathered, ruffled cuffs and the layover style collar without all the fluffy bits. And then we've got D that just has elastic and a tie. So there are very subtle differences, but there are differences and they are worth noting. The reason that all of the views are laid out like this is because in the very next panel, that information becomes important. This panel shows you the different pattern pieces and what they roughly look like, as well as what number they are. So this is pattern piece number 1, number 4, 2, 3, etc. And down here, you have the list explaining what each of those pattern pieces are. So pattern piece number one is the front. That's the front of the shirt. The front is the same pattern piece used for all of them. The same pattern piece number 1, front, is used on every single shirt. Let's find one that's not, shall we? Number 5. So you look down here at number 5, collar. That's this one right here. You see the A and B next to it? That pattern piece is only used on view A and view B, or variation A and variation B of this particular shirt. If you look closely, you'll notice that this collar is drastically different from these two collars and from this collar. So depending on which collar you want on your shirt will determine whether you want pattern piece 5, which is the collar for A and B, or pattern piece 12, which is the collar for C. That's how you determine which pattern pieces you actually need. You don't, in fact, need every single pattern piece for any particular garment you're making. There are extras in almost every pattern that you're going to come across. There will be pattern pieces you don't need. That's okay. This is how you determine it. And I find that it's really good to go through the entire pattern first and pull out just the pattern pieces you need before you even get started. That will save you a lot of confusion later. All of those pattern pieces that we are looking at and talking about like they're very easy things to find are actually folded up in all this stuff right here. And this stuff is called onion skin. Specifically, if I can get a piece of it loose, and yes, it is every bit as aggravating as it appears, if you can see from there and here, it's a very, very light, thin, crunchy paper. This kind of paper is used for patterns because it's really easy to fold up a lot of sheets into a small envelope. But it makes it very difficult for dealing with. It is aggravating, it is fragile, it tears easy, it rips easy, it wads up in knots really easy. It's not the most user-friendly substance. So keep that in mind. Be patient with your pattern. If you only intend to use it once, tear it apart and trash it. That's fine. You can always buy another one. They're, what, $6, $8? They're not that expensive. I am a little too thrifty for my own good at times, and I will reuse a pattern again and again and again and again. One thing that I like to do is trace the pattern onto some tissue paper, especially the pieces of it that get used regularly. That you can do with a light board or just a kitchen window. Tape it up there, tape the tissue paper up, tape the pattern up over it, and trace because you can see the light shining through. We'll cover that in another episode where I will actually be showing you how to resize patterns. Yes, I will be showing you how to resize patterns. Tracing the patterns will come into play there. Don't worry. Now, if we slide over a little bit, you'll find these are just General directions, as it says up at the top conveniently. This is how to interpret some of the notes and symbols that are on the individual pattern pieces. Not every pattern has this in their instructions. Simplicity is pretty good about including these things, especially in their more beginner level patterns, just to help people avoid confusion. So this is the legend. It's explaining what all of these different things mean. And when I pull out the pattern pieces, I will refer back to this so that you can see what we're talking about. I just want to make sure that you see what this is and know what this is. And see, even down here, we have a few little notes on what we mean by sew and pin and what that means in the pictures. Little tips and tricks like this clipping the corners of things. That's really good to know. Anytime there's a curved piece of something, you clip it like that so that it turns easier. I'll probably be addressing that at some later point as well. Moving down to this panel, what we have here, and this looks like a bunch of gobbledygook, I'm sure, all this is, and the next 3 panels from the look of it, all this is a cutting layout. That's it. It is showing you this big square right here is essentially your fabric. It's folded in half and laid out flat. This is how you would pin all of the pattern pieces to that piece of fabric and then cut them out. And there are lots and lots of options. Here we have more, cutting out different little cuffs and collars. All of this is the same thing. Here it is again, same thing. It's just different ways to fold and lay out your fabric and pin the different pattern pieces to it in order to get the most out of your fabric, basically. This is helping you be a little more efficient in your layout and cutting. Let's turn it over and see what else we have. And even at the top of this page, we have more of the same. See this up here? More of the same. And most pattern pieces that I've come across, or pattern instructions, excuse me, do have that in there to help you figure out how to lay it out and cut it. You can follow those instructions if you want, or not. I don't know that I have ever actually adhered to their suggestions, generally speaking, because I'm working with a weird shaped piece of fabric, so it doesn't line up all nicely. But that is a resource for you to use. Now, moving down. This is getting into the sewing directions. This is actually how to put the pattern pieces together. I will be referring back to this as we move forward and actually start making this garment. In this series, I am going to be making this shirt, and I am going to be referring back to these instructions for each little bit that I do, just so that you can see how to interpret what it says here into actual physical working. But I'm giving you a quick overview so that this isn't strange and unusual and scary when we get to that part. You'll notice here it says shirt A, B, C, and D. These are the set of sewing instructions for all of the views of the shirt. All of the different kinds of shirts that you can make with this pattern all follow this same set of instructions. That's not always the case. That is not necessarily how it works every single time. There will be some patterns, especially as they get more intricate, more difficult, more complicated, that will have one section just for the coat and one section just for the skirt. And that's how they will do when you have multiple pieces in there. And you do have to go through, if there's, say, only one thing you want to make. If you get the pirate ensemble that has the coat and the vest and the shirt and the pants, but all you really want is the coat, you need to go through your instructions and make sure you find the instructions for the coat. You would not want to try and put your coat together with the coat pattern pieces using the pants instructions. That will be very, very confusing. I'm looking to see if there's anything that really pops out as an important thing to note at this point. See, here we have something that varies. We've got the collar A, B, and C, instructions, and those are for those 3 collar patterns. But if you look down here, we've got the separate instructions for collar D. That's exactly what I was telling you about. We have 2 sets of instructions. Make sure you pinpoint the right one. Something you might notice just glancing at it is we have shading going on. There are some shaded areas and some light areas. Every pattern is going to do this a little bit differently, but what it is doing here is it is showing you the right and wrong sides of the fabric, and that is exactly how it's referred to, the right side of the fabric and the wrong side of the fabric. The right side essentially is the pretty side, the outside, the side that you want everybody to see. The wrong side is the ugly side, the inside, the side that's going to be next to your body. Those are the differences here, and it might actually, yep, let's look up here. We have a little key showing you. The small dots is the right side, plain white is the wrong side. This funny hash mark is interfacing, and I will explain that as we move forward. And these big dots are the lining. All of those things, I'm going to show you what that means. I don't think this particular pattern has a lining. Most shirts don't actually have linings. That's more of a coat thing. So I don't think we're going to be explaining that. Interfacing is something that is used to reinforce. If you look over here, you'll see those little hash marks. That's because this is the collar. Just about every collar there is does have interfacing in it. And it's a very ugly looking stuff that just goes in between 2 layers of fabric to reinforce. You find it on collars, on cuffs, behind buttonholes, those sorts of places. Okay, that is page 1 finished. Let's see if page 2 holds anything interesting to go over before, well, I say page 2. That was technically page 2 because it was the back of page 1, and now this is page 3. And all of these things, again, I'm going to explain. This looks like a bunch of technical jargon and gibberish. Don't worry. I will be explaining all this to you. All of this, these are showing how the right side of the fabric goes to right side and you stitch it on the inside. I will be explaining that more. If you don't already understand it, don't worry. I will be telling you about that. This is just showing you, I'm just letting you see what we're looking at before we actually get started. That's sleeves A and B. The view I'm actually going to be making is, well, we'll stick with A. We'll stick with A. I have a tendency to not follow the pattern exactly perfectly, but for the purposes of this experiment, I will stick with A. That'll make it easy. This right here, see this funny looking stuff? This funny looking stuff right here? That is actually not interfacing like the little hashes would suggest. This is lace. And this is something that we are going to be dealing with because we're doing view A and it has lace. Lace is a lot of fun. It can be scary, but it is a lot of fun and it's very pretty and it's very floofy, which is exactly what we want for this particular shirt. Because this particular shirt may or may not be winding up on a certain vampire. Spoiler. Here we have a little bit more. See, at this point you can actually start to see it looking a little bit like the shape of a shirt. Here, oh look, they even have given us instructions on how to actually lace up the back of the shirt, or the front of the shirt. The lacing goes in the front, if we have lacing. I haven't decided yet whether I'm going to put lacing. It's just a hassle, we may not use it. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to hurry up and finish. This is just a little bit more. This is actually the neck stock, and I'm going to drag this over here just so you can see it. The neck stock is this thing right here, this crazy black thing that's trying to imitate a cravat or some sort of neck prettiness. We're not going to be making that. I've never actually made that particular piece of this pattern because I usually do it the right way, which I'll probably go over at some point in the future. And there you have it. That is the basic introduction to reading a pattern. I know this was probably not helpful for some of you. I hope it was helpful for at least a few of you. And if there's anything I missed, anything you still have questions about, anything you'd like me to go over in more depth in a future episode, leave me a comment and let me know. And thank you again for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.